Welcome to today's Train the Trainer workshop covering the FDIC's Money Smart for Small Business program. This webinar is a recording of a training delivered to a live audience which included representatives from various small business development organizations and financial institutions in the state of Hawaii. This 2-hour webinar serves as a training for staff of community organizations that plan to offer the Money Smart for Small Business curriculum in their respective markets. Money Smart for Small Business is an instructor-led curriculum developed jointly by the FDIC and the U.S. Small Business Administration. The program is made up of 13 modules and is an introductory business training program for aspiring and existing entrepreneurs, and it covers the basics of starting and growing a business. The webinar hosts are David Ramos and Jennifer Johansson with the FDIC. This video will provide an overview of the 13 modules, take a deep dive into the Managing Cash Flow Module, and share resources for getting started with the program. During this training, the instructors refer to a Train the Trainer participant guide, which serves as a self-help resource and is available to you for download in the YouTube video description. By completing this training, you will enhance your knowledge of the Money Smart for Small Business program and have the confidence to lead a training event. We encourage you to use the curriculum as a financial education tool to support entrepreneurs and create positive banking relationships within your local small business community.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Joe Burns from the SBDC. So we're really pleased to have the FDIC make this presentation of Money Smart for Small Business Train the Trainer today. You know, I came into contact with Money Smart a few years ago when we did the full, at that time, 10 modules out at UH West Oahu, and it was very, very well received. But now there's a few more modules, and it's been revised in conjunction, of course, with the SBA. So I'm really happy that we're going to have a chance to see the new information and really understand that this is one of those valuable things that probably should be more widely known, especially in the challenging circumstances which we're in. Not only for startups, but for existing businesses as well, to kind of validate their existing business model and some of the elements thereof. So before we start, I would like to thank very much our friends and colleagues at the FDIC, Bobby, David, Jen, Kathy, and Tina, for their efforts in making this presentation today, which I know you will find valuable. So again, thank you, and let me turn it over to our presenter, David Ramos. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Joe, for that great introduction, and welcome to everybody. We're happy to be with you. This is our Money Smart for Small Business Train the Trainer workshop. As Joe mentioned, my name is David Ramos, and I'm happy that all of you are going to spend the next few hours with us. I know this is a very busy week for many of us that support small businesses as it is the National Small Business Week. So I do thank you for making this a priority, and we hope you gain a lot from it. Today we will be discussing a tool that hopefully all who are on the call will benefit from using. Here at the FDIC, we often receive feedback from the banking community and members of the small business development community expressing that Money Smart for Small Business is a valuable coaching and development tool for their organizations. The curriculum we will be discussing has been identified by those who have incorporated into their outreach strategies as an impactful and influential product for entrepreneurs seeking to start or grow a small business, firm, or venture. They've also mentioned to us that it's a powerful tool which assists with the effort of new client acquisition or as a defensive strategy to help with client retention. That sounds like maybe it was one of our bank partners who provided that feedback about client acquisition and client retention. And finally, Money Smart is a resource, is how some have identified it, which helps foster and sustain partnerships with hyperlocal small business development organizations. So I think each one of those statements probably speaks to the organizations that we have. I know we were looking at the registrations, and we noticed that we have a good representation. But I wanted to introduce myself, formally, so you'll know who is speaking to you for the next couple of hours. Again, my name is on the screen, David Ramos, and I serve the FDIC in the role of Community Affairs Specialist within the Depositor and Consumer Protection Division. I have been with the organization for 2 years, And in those 2 years, I've overseen the Money Smart for Small Business product and also our Money Smart Spanish language financial education curriculum. That is correct. MSSB is available in English and in Spanish, so I'm double dipping in this role. Prior to joining the FDIC, I spent 12 years with BB&T Bank, which is now Truist Bank. It is a regional bank located in the southeastern United States. During my time as a banker, I had the pleasure of developing skills in the areas of branch management, small business credit underwriting, commercial lending, and community development lending while serving in various roles throughout those 12 years. I wrapped up my time at the bank as the multicultural banking director for the Mid-Atlantic regions, where we engaged the bank's diverse communities through community development and financial education efforts. And I will not be your only host today. My colleague, Jennifer, is with me, and I'm going to have her introduce herself to you as well.
Great. Thank you, David. Hi. Welcome to everybody that's joining us today. My name is Jennifer Johansson. As David said, I will be assisting him in the training session today. I'm currently serving on a temporary assignment as a community affairs specialist. I have been with the FDIC for almost 11 years, working primarily as a compliance examiner, but I have a deep passion for financial education and community development, which has led me to this role in community affairs with the FDIC. I'm excited to be here with you guys today and share this Money Smart for Small Business curriculum with you, and look forward to discussing it more.
Thanks, Jen. And now back to our program here. I'm going to share some ground rules that hopefully helps facilitate the time we're going to spend together. We really do encourage you to participate when we ask questions via our chat option. Keep in mind that this course was designed to be taught in person, so we've had to adapt a lot of it for it to be delivered virtually. So we're going to use the chat option as the equivalent of raising our hand or making a comment during class time. We're going to have a time for us to do a Q&A towards the end of the presentation, so we do encourage all questions also. If you want to ask them over the audio, there'll be instructions to do so. We definitely want you to tell us what you think. We want your feedback. I know a few of you emailed me prior to the event, so many of you have my email as well as Jennifer's email and even Joe's email. He knows how to get a hold of us. We'd love to hear your feedback. And really, I know that we are competing with a lot of distractions. If many of you are working from home like I am, there's too many distractions sometimes. So we ask that you can set aside your cell phones if you're not, using your cell phones for this event, and any other personal devices, because I know I sometimes have an itchy finger and tend to check things while in a training course. But I'm going to go over what is in the training material. Everyone should have received a Train the Trainer participant guide that I believe we emailed yesterday afternoon or yesterday morning, your time. You guys can use that to follow along, but we will also have, obviously, the visuals in front of you here on the presentation. This is a different PowerPoint slide from what we shared with you. You guys have the actual participant guide that the participants of this workshop would receive in person. If you did not get one, please, in the chat option, just put in your email, and Jennifer can email you guys while I speak to the curriculum here. So just go ahead and do that if we overlooked you, if you did not receive it. So within this guide, you'll have a Money Smart for Small Business module matrix, which is a detailed overview of the 13 modules that make up the curriculum. That's found in pages 21 to 24 of that guide that I was mentioning. You'll also have an instructor guide, a participant guide, and a PowerPoint slides for the Managing Cash Flow module, which will be used to showcase a typical training. Later on, Jennifer's going to walk us through this training. We're going to have an in-depth look at that module specifically, and that's found on pages 25 through 71 of that guide. There's a glossary of terms, pages 38 through 40 of that guide. We'll have those glossary of terms. And there's success tips and resources that you can use to successfully host your own Money Smart for Small Business programs. And that's found on page 80 of your participant guide. And again, that's a living document that stays with you. It's available on our website. We'll show you how to get there because it is a living document. It could change. But I find that it's very useful for many of organizations that are looking to adopt our programs. It almost serves as a guidebook, a coaching book for you as the coach. Okay, so back to the chat function. It'll serve as our parking lot. To help manage time, we may need to park some questions. I do not think that I'll have all the answers to your questions, but we can definitely find those answers. Myself and Jennifer that are on the call. We will assess at the end to see if we've delivered on those questions. If not, we can always follow up with an email. We've done that in the past with other groups. If not, we can plan to follow up, like I said, post-event, either through Joe or sending the group directly a response to those questions. So my understanding is that each of you contributes to the development of businesses in the communities that you serve. In this case, in the islands that are located in the Hawaiian state. Another assumption I have is that you are all familiar with the many options available to provide business training. Today, my goal is to introduce you to one more option, which is called our Money Smart for Small Business curriculum. Our agenda today is on your screen. Obviously, Joe kicked us off with a quick welcome. I'm going to be, in the next slide or two, I'm going to be sharing the learning objectives that we have for today. We're going to be also visiting the Money Smart for Small Business curriculum overview, where we'll be looking at all 13 modules at a individual level, so you'll know what each of them say. But specifically, before we get into that, I'm going to share why this program was created, who benefits from it, and how they benefit from it. I think that's always important to know. Like I said, we'll be reviewing the 13 modules, and it'll be followed up by a deeper look, a deeper dive into one of them, which is the Managing Cash Flow Module. And finishing up, we will talk about how to join the MSSB Alliance and how to start using MSSB to help you host a successful Money Smart for Small Business training program. So there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask questions during the presentation, like I mentioned, in the chat function. We will have a 10-minute break. So this introduction to Money Smart for Small Business should take about 2 hours or so to complete, but we are conscious that it's a long 2 hours, and we'll have everyone break for a couple of minutes in the middle of it. So right now, this is the part where we all get to participate, making sure that that the chat function is working on your end. Just in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to ask each of you to maybe jot down 2 or 3 resources that your organization has that other organizations serving entrepreneurs love. Or let me say it a different way. Maybe things that you deliver that are in your playbook that entrepreneurs love, that they just can't do without. I'd love to see what those things are. I know for us, I was talking with my colleague, I would definitely put, if I was responding to this icebreaker, I would definitely put our Money Smart for Small Business modules on banking services and business credit. Those tend to be the ones that a lot of our trainers look for and banks look for. So I am seeing there from Bernard, Profit Sense, again from Bernard, cash flow projections and spreadsheets. I'm glad he mentioned that because Jen's portion is going to talk about that. Let's see, anybody else can contribute besides Bernard? Market research. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that. That's very important for any small business. All right, like I mentioned, I'm going to move on. We're going to be looking at the learning objectives. So our goal today is to introduce you, obviously, to the MSSB curriculum. We're going to be looking at what it is, why it was created, who can benefit, how they benefit, and getting started with this product. On page 4 of your participant guide, you'll find that the learning objectives are there stated for you. Ideally, you will walk away from this presentation with a greater understanding of the MSSB curriculum, its benefits, and how you can incorporate MSSB into your training programs and outreach to achieve meaningful and lasting impact in the communities you serve. So what we want to do is complement. I know many of you already have programs, many of you already offer maybe similar courses, but this is a way to complement those efforts. We have organizations that reach out to us where they say, listen, we've taught credit, but never from the point of view that MSSB delivers it from. And we like to adopt it as an additional course when we talk about credit options. Absolutely. We have organizations, bankers that call us. We really don't have an outreach strategy to deliver financial education, and we like to adopt the entire MSSB curriculum. Again, that's an option as well. So after completing the Train the Trainer workshop, this is what you'll be able to do. You can register as an MSSB Alliance member. You can order the 13 modules on CD-ROM or download them directly in your computer. This includes, for each module, an instructor guide, a participant guide, the PowerPoint slide deck that you'll need, You'll also present the MSSB. You'll be able to present the MSSB curriculum with confidence and describe effective ways to make the content of each module compelling and engaging. You can also list and describe at a high level the goals and the objectives of each of the modules that come in the curriculum. And you describe several ways to customize an MSSB program to meet the diverse needs of small business owners who represent a range of business development stages and learning needs. So here we're going to talk a little bit about what it is. MSSB is an instructor-led curriculum collaboratively developed by the FDIC and the SBA that provides introductory business training for aspiring and existing entrepreneurs on the basics of starting and growing a business. Joe alluded to this in his welcome. In 2012, the FDIC and the SBA created 10 modules that cover a wide range of business topics. And later in 2015, 3 new modules were created. We're going to look at, again, all 13 of them. There are a total of this makes it a total of 13 modules. Each module takes about 60 to 90 minutes that cover a wide range of business topics. And it includes comprehensive instructor guide, participant guide, and again, the PowerPoint deck that I mentioned. The modules are instructor-led, so they can be delivered as a standalone module or maybe mix and match to meet the specific needs of the entrepreneurs, and can be integrated into training programs that your organization currently utilize to create a lasting impact in your communities. In a few minutes, we will provide you with the overview of the 13 modules, and we'll take a deep dive into one so you can achieve a solid understanding of the MSSB curriculum and start thinking about how you can incorporate them into your training and outreach strategies. Okay, MSSB was created really as a tool, but with 4 different groups in mind. So the first one was to assist financial institutions and community organizations in their mission to assist aspiring and existing entrepreneurs. The second is to help entrepreneurs think through their business model and to start and grow their businesses. Third, have a sustainable impact in all types of communities from urban to rural. But ultimately, as our fourth point, the most important one, I would say, to spur economic activity wherever the community is that adopts the program. So many can benefit from employing and receiving the training. On this list are financial institutions and community organizations. These include small business or economic development organizations, community banks, and financial institutions. Those are very often some folks that participate with us. Government programs that have reached out to us. We had a Senator of New York's office reach out to us. They had something around the March-April timeline when COVID was at its highest, that they wanted to do something for their constituents, and they wanted to adopt our program and couple it with an existing grant that they had available to small businesses. So again, it could be complementary to these services. Chambers of Commerce are also included in independent small business consultants. Again, aspiring existing entrepreneurs were top of mind. We split these from 2 viewpoints. An aspiring entrepreneur is someone who wants to start up a company, and an existing entrepreneur is someone who's probably in their 3rd, 4th, 5th year of operation. So aspiring entrepreneurs have many questions, passion, and determination and fears. They need a solid foundation to successfully start and grow a business, and we think that the Money Smart curriculum helps speak to that audience. Existing entrepreneurs, on the other hand, have successfully started their business, but as their business grows, they have growing business demands, including different skill sets. Communities, how do they benefit? Communities, both urban and rural, can benefit from Money Smart for small business. MSSB is generic and can be easily modified to be appropriate for any stage or type of business. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide, how they benefit. And I'll try to go as quickly as possible because this list could be very long. So financial institutions and community organizations, they benefit from becoming a catalyst for innovation, revitalization, and job creation in their community and local economies. They anchor themselves to the communities where they operate and serve. Financial institutions may receive positive consideration under the Community Reimbursement Act if they participate with this program. If the organization offering MSSB are considered Certified Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, they may be able to establish or enhance MSSB programs to meet the needs of their low to moderate income clients. Aspiring entrepreneurs benefit from the ability to control one's life. They build a business and create wealth with the program. Understand skills required in a startup situation. They can learn skills in maintaining a business, learn skills in business management and operations, and the ability to find more advanced training or access to other resources and services through this curriculum. Now, the community, I think this is kind of where we all share a stake in it, is where we revitalize local economies and more jobs. Wealth created by aspiring and existing entrepreneurs tend to stay in community through reinvestment. Jobs created keep talent in the community, meaning that job seekers don't need to leave the community. Again, I live in the state of Virginia. Southwestern Virginia is plagued with this, where there's not a lot of jobs, so the youth, the educated are up and leaving to other parts of the state. So there's a brain drain. So again, small business plays a role with this, and we like to think that MSSB also plays a role in keeping those folks in their local communities. So we're now going to introduce you to each of the 13 modules, like I mentioned before. I will briefly describe each module and how best to use it. Detailed information about each module is contained within the MSSB modules matrix, available in your guide, and the participant guide for each respective module. So if you are looking on our website, you'll see that each module will have a kind of an introduction to the module in the instructor guide that is handed or available for you. Okay, there are 3 components to each of the 13 modules. So every module is going to look very similar in this format. In structure, really that's by design. They all look very similar in what you have, what's available to you to deliver. So the components of each module consist of a fully scripted instructor guide in Word and PDF formats, a participant guide in Word and PDF formats, and overhead slides which serve as your visuals in PowerPoint and PDF formats. The instructor guide is your roadmap for presenting the modules. It includes the purpose and objectives of the module, a detailed lesson plan, and a copy of the overhead slides. Again, those are your visuals for the presentation. I really do like the instructor guide because even if you are not an expert in that particular subject, I feel if you spend some time reading that instructor guide and using the resources that it provides, you can really be prepared. You can prepare yourself to present that module. I know we've had some of that feedback before, that people get a little anxious when presenting something that they're not comfortable with. But I think that the program does a very good job about thinking ahead about this and providing all the tools that an instructor may need to deliver. So the topics of the training modules provide a practical introduction to aspects of starting and growing a business that can be taught in any order or independently in 60 to 90 minutes. In addition to grounding participants in the basics, the curriculum serves as a foundation for more advanced training and technical assistance. So our next slide has all 13 modules. The first 10 modules that were launched in 2012 are on your left-hand side if you're looking at the screen. They are the banking services, credit reporting, financial management, insurance, organizational types, record keeping, risk management, selling a business, and succession planning, tax planning, time management. Those are the first 10. I think that, again, Joe mentioned when he first got familiar with the program, that's what we had available. The 3 newly created modules are on your right-hand side. You can read the titles there. These 3 new modules are the 90 minutes, are the ones that take 90 minutes and contain case studies and interactive tools. So we've updated the curriculum to make it more interactive. I think that was part of the feedback that we received. The latest update took place this past January. We updated 2 of the existing modules, which are the banking services and the credit reporting modules. MSSB is reviewed and updated periodically. We worked alongside our national partner, Credit Builders Alliance, who is a national nonprofit dedicated to credit building and providing support to small volume lenders. So CBA lent their expertise in various phases of the updates to include gathering feedback from community-based organizations and individual entrepreneurs who have participated in our programs through focus groups to ensure updates to the credit module responded to their needs. That's really what they played a role in that. Again, that's one of the partners that asked me to join a call. They wanted to kind of get an update as to what's happening with the efforts that they put forward. And, we're very happy because a lot of the feedback that we were getting from the instructors like yourself and also the organizations, the business owners who went through the training was incorporated into this recent update that we just did in January. So again, we had a lot of valuable input from many of these partners, and we will be reviewing each module in alphabetical order. But please note that on our website, they're not listed they are listed in a different order. You're not gonna see them in the order that Jen and I are gonna present them in. Okay. So the best, where we're gonna start is with this first module, banking services, understanding the value for small businesses. Banking services will introduce banking products and services available to aspiring and existing entrepreneurs, including business checking, payroll processing, merchant services, business loans, and cash management services. So it really does take a look, at all the services that you can probably go to a bank and get from A to Z. This module also explains how to select the best banking products and services for their business. It guides the participants to kind of think about their business, right? If you take a bakery shop, you can have 2 delivery channels for a bakery shop. You can have one that depends on their traffic that comes in and out every day. And then you have others that, maybe drive their business electronically and they're taking orders online, but, they're delivering their food obviously directly to the client. Same sort of shop, right? It's a bakery shop, but the tools, the point of sale systems, the way they take money in and out is going to look different. And it could be, again, 2 individuals running a similar company that need different banking products. So it helps, the participant kind of take a viewpoint as, hey, I am in this business, but what in particular do I need? How am I going to be running this business? What services am I going to need to inquire from the bank? So at the end of the module, the goal is for the entrepreneurs to gain a solid understanding of the banking products and services available to small business owners, to understand the importance of building effective long-term relationships with a banker or a lender. I can't stress that point enough. Relationships go a long way, especially with a banker. If a entrepreneur is able to establish a relationship with their banker, it leads to a better understanding of their business from that banker or from that account manager. It leads to a proactive relationship management where a banker or, if they have someone inside the bank kind of looking out for their best interests and saying, hey, you know what, this can probably work for Tim's business, and let me call him before it becomes an issue, and maybe then we're addressing it, on the back end where we can be proactive. It leads to better advice and knowledge. If they, obviously, if that firsthand knowledge that they'll gain from the business owner, if that relationship is there. And an open line of communication. Again, this is important when it comes to, requesting a loan. You want to have those open lines of communication. Sometimes because of that lack of communication, I noticed in my career that that's where we lost a couple of deals, either from the bank side or from obviously the entrepreneur side. I like this module because it does do a great job of recognizing the role of personal credits, of a personal credit score in the lending process. Again, we will touch a little bit about this on our next module in the credit piece, but I can't stress that enough, how personal credit impacts business decisions on the small business side. So this module, if you're thinking, who can I deliver this module to? This module is best for business owners at early stages or those who are seeking a loan from a financial institution. The most important aspect of this module is to emphasize that entrepreneurs should start a relationship with a financial institution well before they need a loan. So again, I mentioned that we were going to be talking about credit reporting, and the subtitle here is Demystified. I do think that's an appropriate statement for this module. The credit reporting module highlights the impact of credit reports on the operation and growth of a business and the impact that the business owner's personal credit can have on it. Again, I mentioned that earlier. It identifies credit reports and other systems used to assess the risk of extending credit to entrepreneurs and small business owners. At the end of the module, the goal is to have the entrepreneur understand the full scope of credit reporting and the impact of credit reports on the operation or growth of a small business, discover strategies for building or improving business credit, appreciate how personal credit scores impact the ability of a business to get credit. And again, I can't stress this enough. We saw this at the bank often, where people have this misconception that, so I've damaged my personal credit. If I start my business, then that means I'm gonna, now be operating under the business name and its, tax identification number, thinking they can start from a clean slate. But unfortunately, especially for a small business owner in the early startup stages, you can't do without. That comes hand in hand. Their personal credit is the company's credit, in other words. And again, it's a a story that repeated itself. I remember I walked into an attorney's office. He was looking to purchase a building. He was leasing his space. His first question was, I want a loan that does not have a personal guarantee and does not use my personal credit. So as a banker, that tells you that there's something wrong, obviously, with the credit or with that guarantee or him, providing that guarantee. But again, it was just really a misconception. When we started pulling back the layers, it was a misconception that he had. There was nothing wrong with his credit, but he had a misconception that if anything went wrong, he didn't want to pay for it on the personal side. So again, this is a misconception. I like to label it a misconception because people just don't know otherwise. So if you're thinking, who can I deliver this module to? Companies in all stages of business development, especially those who may have concerns about their credit scores and or those who plan to apply for loans. There's plenty of content provided by various organizations about personal credit scores. We do acknowledge that, but this module may be one of the few resources related to business credit. Some financial institutions and community organizations use this module as a standalone module or as a complement to other business development initiatives. We have seen it used by community organizations as part of a one-day session where the credit and banking modules were taught in partnership with financial institutions and or credit counseling organizations. So again, these first two modules, I would say, are probably our most popular ones. So financial management, again, a great module for any entrepreneur. The subtitle here is Appropriate Allocation of Resources. And financial management identifies financial management practices, rules, and tools commonly available for small businesses and how these tools work. The tools covered under the topic here include bookkeeping, projections, financial statements, and financing, which all play a role in sound business decision-making. At the end of the module, our goal is for the entrepreneur to grasp the importance of sound financial management, understand the small business financial management basics, including startup financing, and that includes equity, sweat equity, personal credit cards that people tend to use, personal debt, family or friend equity contributions. They'll take out loans with family and friends to get that startup financing. This module talks about all that. It talks also about financing for a growing business, financing for working capital, financing for fixed assets. This could probably be, I guess, your audience for this module would be companies in all stages of business development, especially business owners who are interested in obtaining a loan from a financial institution. Now, insurance, I think this is planning for the unexpected. I can't say it any better. Insurance identifies the types of insurance that small businesses should understand and consider. At the end of the module, entrepreneurs will recognize the importance of small business insurance, understand the full range of insurance products and services, and then know the difference between required coverage and other optional coverage or other types of coverage that are available to them. It may be best for companies in all stages of business development, especially those who do not yet have insurance or find some insurance terms and or concepts to be confusing. And now we're going to go into organizational types. Really, it's advantages and disadvantages of business structures. I tend to like this one because, again, a lot of small business owners in my days in banking had these questions for their banker. So I think it's a great investment for those of you that work with small businesses to really spend time with this and help them understand this portion. So organizational types, this module analyzes the most common legal entities or structures. At the end of the module, entrepreneurs will know that the legal structure that the legal structure of a business determines how a company operates and it's taxed. I think that's the most important part. It distinguishes the general characteristics, advantages, and disadvantages of organizational types such as sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited liability companies, C corporations, and S corporations. I'm going to advance the slide here. So this module will consider each legal structure's characteristics, like I mentioned. It is going to look at it from a taxation point of view, the liability and risk that comes with each type of organizational structure. It talks about management control or rights. Obviously, if you get more investors, it dilutes the control sometimes of that owner, of the original owner, so it talks about that. Continuity and transferability, and it also talks about expense and formality of each structure. So this could be best delivered to companies in early stages of business development. Can't stress that enough, especially those who have not yet incorporated and may be confused by the risk and benefits of each organizational type. Statistics show that the majority of small businesses operate as sole proprietorships. business owners need to understand how to protect themselves and their business assets. Again, this is a crucial module to help them understand that process and how they can protect themselves as a business owner. Our next one is record keeping. This is the module. It's subtitled Critical Managerial Tool. Record keeping identifies practical record keeping techniques. At the end of the module, entrepreneurs will comprehend the necessity for good record keeping, learn about small business record keeping practices and rules, discover record keeping software tools. This could be best for companies in all stages of the business development cycle, especially those who lack formal record keeping disciplines. Again, you know your clients. You can probably think of a few folks that you're saying, hey, this could be a good class for that person to sit through. An example I think that we all saw of this nationally was at the beginning of the year when PPP came out. I know that a lot of the feedbacks, I was pulled into a project that dealt with community bankers and getting some of their feedback. And a lot of them were saying that they wanted to help, but, the lack of record keeping from small business owners sometimes was a challenge to get the loans in place or get the applications really just started. And so we saw an example of that really from all of us. And we're going to now jump into risk management, and I'm going to let Jen kind of close us out with the remainder modules that we have here. So Jen, you want to take over?
Yeah, great. Thank you, David. Great introduction to the first modules that we have, and I will be taking over here. We'll talk about the last modules in this program, and then we'll go ahead and take a little break before we move on in the training. So the first one that I want to talk about here is risk management. The tagline there, be prepared for negative outcomes. And so we'll just touch briefly on this module. So this particular module identifies the common risks that are associated with a small business and how businesses are going to manage those risks. As you know, internal risks that face organizations are things like human risk, illness, theft, fraud. So those things are addressed. Physical risk, building, utilities, things like that. Those are all internal risks that face a business. External risks would be things like competition, market conditions, laws, regulations, and those are the external risks. So businesses operate in an environment where they're influenced by these risks. So this particular module, or through this particular module, entrepreneurs will have the ability to understand these common risks, whether they're internal or external, that are associated with a small business. Identifying the external and internal factors that are going to affect those risks, and if those risks are greater or lesser of an impact for your particular small business. And then also through the module, participants will discuss implementing, monitoring, and evaluating a risk management plan for their small business. One thing that participants should understand is that their business plan should identify the risks that affect their business. This particular module may be best for companies that are in all stages of their business development. As you know, risks are going to affect your business no matter what stage you're in. But it's especially important for those entrepreneurs who really want to learn about minimizing the internal and external risks that their business face. And there, depending on what stage your business life cycle might be in, the risks might be different. This module could be considered slightly more of an in-depth version of a SWOT analysis, if you remember that sort of a concept, looking at a business's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then it also might be combined very well with the insurance module that David mentioned, right? So when you talk about a business owner identifying and managing the risk in their business, it certainly correlates that one of the ways they do manage that risk is through insurance. And so those two modules can work very well together. The next module that we'll be talking about is called Selling a Business and Succession Planning. So here we're talking specifically about exit strategies, right? So in this module, it explains how to establish an exit strategy for a business, whether that's through the sale of the business or transferring the ownership to a successor. This particular module is going to get business owners thinking about, is their business saleable? What price should they ask for their business? Give them some things to think about in preparation for a sale. How do you look for a buyer for your business? And then ultimately negotiating the price of the business when you go to sell it. At the end of the module, entrepreneurs will learn how to change the ownership of their business, whether it's through selling the business, closing it, or passing it to the successor. But also, participants will learn how to establish an exit strategy. If it's related to retirement, that would include some sort of a succession plan. If there's transferring ownership, paying taxes, anything that might be related to that retirement if their business is in that particular life cycle or that stage of the life cycle. This particular module might be best for companies that are in all stages of their development, because certainly you may have to be thinking about that exit strategy, but it's especially important to those who are thinking about selling or transferring ownership maybe more in the near term, right? So that's going to be slightly more relevant to them. So good things to consider, good topics for that module. The next module we're going to talk about briefly is tax planning, understanding the details. And obviously that's a pretty good tagline for this module. Understanding the details of taxes can be kind of complicated, but this module introduces the entrepreneurs or participants of the module to the tax requirements, either at the state level, local, or federal levels, and helps them to create some sort of a plan to be able to pay their taxes. Of course, common taxes that impact a small business would be the income tax, employment taxes, or any self-employment tax, sales tax, the list goes on. So those are the common taxes for the entrepreneurs to understand. And by the end of the module, the entrepreneurs will be able to understand not only the range of taxes and the reporting requirements of a small business, but also be able to research general tax reporting requirements. It's important for them to understand how to establish a plan to pay their taxes. Like we said, it's certainly one of the things that is important as a business owner, and having a plan in place is going to help them fulfill their obligation there. This particular module might be best for companies that are in all stages of their business development. Again, taxes affect all of them, but especially to those individuals or businesses that haven't really set up some sort of a system to ensure that they're able to get their taxes paid in a timely manner. It's good information in that regard. This next module we're going to talk about is called time management. Of course, the tagline there being steps on effective use of your time. And I don't think it goes, don't think it's any big surprise that time management is an important and almost vital concept for small business owners. So this module explains this concept of time management, why it's important and critical for small business owners. At the end of this module, the entrepreneurs will be able to understand the importance of time management, and the module itself discusses commonly used time management practices like the ones that are listed on the slide. Of course, the first one there, the Pareto analysis, dealing with kind of that 80-20 rule, with the idea that 20% of the effort produces 80% of the result. The ABC method, of course, that is just simply ranking the tasks as A, B, or C, with A being the most important, so being able to address those first. The Eisenhower method, of course, balances this idea of is a task urgent and what's its level of importance. And so you kind of put together this urgency and importance matrix, and that helps you identify what how you want to manage your time, or what's the most important item to address first. And then the final method there is just simply an acronym relating to prioritizing, organizing, streamlining, economizing, and contributing to try to manage the time and the decisions that have to be made in the small business. So this particular module is important for, obviously, businesses that are in all stages of their development, since by nature a small business is one that is typically short-staffed. As such, time management is critical to the success of that business. But as a special note, time management module might work really well if it's combined with the organization type module that David talked about, because it really encourages the entrepreneur to think about how they can fulfill the needs of their business. So if they're that aspiring entrepreneur, they're just at that beginning stages, they're thinking about how they want to set up their business, and they're thinking about what organization type might fit best for their model, this might be an important module as well, because it'll help them think about how am I going to staff my business? What are the human resource needs of my business or my organization type? So those two modules can work really well together, something to kind of think about. Now we're getting into this next module here. This one is called "Is Small Business Ownership Good Fit for You?" And this has a strengths assessment activity in this module. This module plus the next two are the newest 3 additions to the MSSB curriculum. And so just kind of know that. This is, as Joe mentioned at the beginning, the original curriculum had the first 10, so we'll be starting our discussion of our newest 3 modules. So this module is one of the 3 new modules, as I said. It helps these aspiring entrepreneurs think about the realities of starting a business. And are they ready to start a business? So by the end of the module, entrepreneurs will be able to think about the difference between myths and realities of small business ownership. It talks about this concept of roots of power, or the roots of power metaphor, really basically saying that you have people power, sales power, financial power, and self-discipline power, and those are the 4 roots of power that are really needed before your tree or your small business can bear fruit. So the module goes through that sort of a metaphor and kind of discusses that so that an entrepreneur can think about their business from that perspective. You need the roots, you need the foundation for the tree to grow strong and successful. The module starts with a self-assessment to help entrepreneurs determine their readiness to become a small business owner. Also helps them gain insight into their own personal readiness and if it's the right time for them to start a business. So while this is probably a really good module for an aspiring entrepreneur at the early stages, I think it's pretty obvious if you're in that first stages of decision making, it would be important there. But it's also good for existing business owners to step back occasionally and benefit from the self-assessment. You know, do my strengths align well with the business model that I've established? So it could be good for both, but certainly the aspiring entrepreneurs would benefit very well from this module. It's recommended that this class be offered typically as the first part of a program. I know we've discussed a number of our other modules, and we've put these 3 newer modules towards the bottom, but it is a recommendation if you're customizing a training program and you're picking out maybe a handful of these modules that you think best fit the needs of your participants, we do recommend that this might be the first module that you offer in a program because it really helps set the stage for the later modules in a class, especially if your target audience are these aspiring entrepreneurs who are really at the ground level of starting their business and setting up their business. It's also recommended that this module be used in conjunction with the organizational types module, just simply because that module is going to explain the different types of businesses, as David explained. So again, thinking about an aspiring entrepreneur who's at that stage of their business development, these modules can go very well together and go very much hand in hand as they're getting ready to launch their business. So this is the module for Is Small Business Ownership a Good Fit for You? The second module then of the newer 3 that we have is called Planning for a Healthy Business. Of course, we're talking about startup costs and beyond. So here in this module, the module is talking about, it really introduces aspiring entrepreneurs to the benefit of planning and making smart decisions. Right, so planning ahead for their business. We do recommend offering this module as a second stage in a program, again, if you're trying to customize a program, basically because it covers 4 different forms of planning, from simple planning to the complex planning for a business. By the end of the module, entrepreneurs will discover what we call a 4-step business planning process. And they're going to walk through this process via a case study in the module. And it's really designed to help them think about and create a long-term healthy business. So of course, it starts with the first phase, which is the back of the napkin plan, which is where entrepreneurs sketch out their rough ideas, either on a napkin or an envelope. We've seen businesses get started that way, right? It's easy. You get an idea and you just scribble down your thoughts. The second phase being the resource plan. This is really like the shopping list of what resources are needed for that business or to grow that business. The third piece there being the business plan itself. This is the entrepreneur's story that they're going to share with their lender. It's important to emphasize through this module that the business plan is really a living idea. It's not a static document. It might be printed on paper, but the business plan is really that living idea, the dream that the entrepreneur has for their business. And the fourth step being the action plan. So how is the entrepreneur going to strategize their time? And so this four-step process is really the meat of this particular module. Again, it's best maybe for aspiring entrepreneurs, as we said, because they're really thinking about getting started with their business and starting out healthy and strong, so that they're well planned out when they launch. But the business planning process is something that can elevate the decision making regardless of where the entrepreneur is at the business or in their business process. And so existing entrepreneurs can also benefit from some of those planning tools and thinking about, making sure that their business stays healthy. It's important to clarify here that although this module talks briefly about a business plan, we do not expect entrepreneurs to be able to develop a business plan as a result of attending this module. The idea is that participants would just be knowledgeable about the resources that they have and that they can use to develop their business plan. So just kind of a note there. And then real quickly before we pause for a break, the last module I just want to summarize is our Managing Cash Flow module. The tagline there being practical problem solving. And so this is the module that we are going to do a little bit deeper dive into when we get back from break. But the module itself is a great overview of cash flow and how to manage the cash flow in a small business. As I said, this is the third new module that we've added to the MSSB curriculum, and it's recommended that it's offered in conjunction with the financial management module, that the two kind of go hand in hand. By the end of this module, entrepreneurs will be able to learn about the critical importance of cash flow management. Being able to manage that cash flow is critical to the success of that business. And through this module, it'll ask participants to ask as an advisor to Bob, the owner of the Wired Cup small business. It's a case study that really is the meat of the module, and they'll be advisors and provide suggestions to him for managing his cash flow in his business. Another takeaway from the module is that the entrepreneurs will understand the need for expert assistance and advice. Right? Sometimes you just have to reach out and get input from others in order to make sure that your business can be a success. So while this particular module is important for businesses at all stages of development, it's especially important for those who lack financial management expertise. So this module is especially helpful for new business owners who who might be preparing to work with accountants or their bankers, and it's going to help demystify a lot of the cash flow terminology that is used when they're dealing with these experts. So it's a really good way to understand an overview of the cash flow process, and we will deep dive into that a little bit more. Just to kind of summarize here, again, there are 13 modules that are all out of the box and ready to go. So you can really pick up just one of these modules or two if those are the topics that are most relevant to your client. All these modules in the curriculum, the materials are free and completely customizable, both to meet your needs and your training needs, or to meet the needs of the entrepreneurs and community that you serve. As David said, if you've got a training program in place, but you want to supplement with just the materials from one or two of the modules, that's a great way to do it. If you don't have as structured of a training program in place and you're looking at, implementing a full program, that's perfect as well. So it's really is customizable from that perspective. Again, each of these modules, as David said earlier, comes with an instructor guide, a participant guide, and then corresponding PowerPoint presentation so that you can really facilitate a great learning environment with those resources and those tools. So with that, I think we are going to take a quick break here. So I will give you about 10 minutes. Looks like if we come back about 5 minutes after the hour, we will get into the next portion of our training. We will start off, I will be doing a deep dive into the cash flow module, or the Managing Cash Flow module, and we will put you into the shoes of the participant so you can kind of get to see from the participant's perspective some of the PowerPoint presentations and activities that are used in that module. And we'll go through that, and then we will throw it back to David to kind of summarize how to get started with the MSSB curriculum, and that will wrap up our time today. So we'll see you back at 5 after the hour.
And this is the operator. I'll go ahead and place that line on hold. Just give me one moment, please.
All right, welcome back to everyone. I've got 5 after the hour, so we'll go ahead and get into this second portion of our training today. As I said, we will be taking a deep dive into the Managing Cash Flow module. Before I get started, I just want to say I did have a question come in on the chat. For now, we're going to just hold questions to the end, and we will address them. It looks like there's a way for chat questions to come in to me individually as a presenter, but I can't respond, so we'll just wait and hold those to the end, and then we will address those questions. So like I said, this part of our training, we're going to deep dive into the cash flow module called Managing Cash Flow. This is Module 13 on the Money Smart for Small Business website. We will be using the instructor and participant guide appendices, which are actually found in the participant guide that we provided you. So this is pages 25 to about 71. I will reference various pages in the Train the Trainer guide as we go through our deep dive here this morning. So the goals for this deep dive are really twofold. First of all, we want to provide you with an overview of the module, which we touched on a little bit before the break. But also, as I mentioned, we want to give you the opportunity to kind of step into the shoes of a training participant and experience parts of the module as if you were that aspiring entrepreneur or the existing small business owner that was enrolled in a Managing Cash Flow class. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about the module sort of from both of those perspectives. The module itself is a very interactive learning experience. It was designed that way to encourage participants to focus on cash flow management, understanding that it's an essential competency of business ownership, right? No matter where an entrepreneur is in their learning development of their business, this particular module asks them to, a lot of great questions about their business and helps them to prepare to interact with accountants, analyze the cash flow of their business, interact with their banker, and just understand where the cash is flowing in and out of their business. As David mentioned, this is one of the 90-minute modules. It is a little bit longer just because of the interactive activities and the case study that is the basis of this module, or that takes up a big portion of this module, so just recognize that. But again, can be customizable. So if you go through the instructor guide and decide there's certain parts of the discussion that might be able to be streamlined, or you might be able to address that discussion in a little different manner than what was originally laid out in the instructor guide, you have that flexibility to adapt the module to the time that you have. Let's say maybe you've only got a 60-minute time slot to do your training. It is customizable and able to be modified. So the slides that we're going to be going through in this next portion here of the presentation do include slides that are actually from the Managing Cash Flow module that correspond to the instructor and participant guides of that module. They're actual slides. And then those are also included in the participant guide appendices that was provided to you in your Train the Trainer participant guide. One way that you can recognize if we're looking at a slide that's actually from the module is you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, it'll say Managing Cash Flow in all capital white letters. And that's a way for you to know that this is a slide, as we're going through them, this is a slide that's actually from the curriculum itself. So just kind of a tip there if you're wanting to know, if this is just a slide we're using to discuss the module with you today, or if this is an actual slide from the module. So let's go ahead and walk through the Managing Cash Flow module so that you can experience the topics in this module. So the first thing here is the pre-test. Again, you can see, as I just pointed out, is kind of the hint there. The lower right-hand corner, you see the white text that says Managing Cash Flow. So this is a slide directly from the module materials, from the PowerPoint presentation, that you would use in your training. So it just talks about the pre-test, and so it's going to ask participants to locate the pre- and post-test form in the back of their participant guide. You can turn to page 44 or scroll, I guess, because you probably have it electronic, to page 44 of your participant guide for this Train the Trainer session to be able to see the pre- and post-test form. Here you'd ask the participants to complete the before training column. In this case, you can just look through it to see what that form would be that you would be asking the participants to complete. Certainly you can complete it for yourself if you're thinking about starting your own business or have a business idea that you want to think about starting, go for it. But that's the before the training assessment to help gauge the knowledge of the class before you kind of get started. All right, and then obviously the post-test there would be for assessing the learning after the completion of the module, and we will circle back around at the end of our discussion to talk about the post-test. So next we'll talk quickly just about the agenda. Again, this is the agenda right from the materials. So this is knowing that this is a PowerPoint presentation that can be customized. You can customize it to the training needs that you would have. But before presenting this module or any of the modules, it's a good idea to read through the instructor guide and familiarize yourself with the material and the learning objectives. And then make sure that you kind of address the agenda with the participants so they kind of know where the training is going, what you're going to be talking about, what the case study, it briefly points to the case study and gives some topics about what that agenda is. So that gives them a good sense of where the training is going. So that also is our agenda kind of as we go. We will be talking about that case study, the balance sheet, different views of the cash flow, and we'll be walking through those ourselves. Similarly, in conducting a training, we would want to talk about the learning objectives. So these are the learning objectives from the module itself. Again, you can see them there on the slide. You can also turn to page 28 in your Train the Trainer participant guide if you want to see them there. But this module, like every other module, includes various learning objectives. So the 5 bulleted learning objectives here for managing the cash flow module are on the slide. And remember, this module is introducing the entrepreneurs to the basics of cash flow management. So those learning objectives seem to make sense and fit with that module. Ideally, we want participants that complete the training to have a good understanding of the importance of cash flow and to be thinking about things like how much money is moving in and out of their business. Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? When that money is moving in and out of the business? And are they meeting their financial obligations? And if not, or if they're struggling, think about seeking out expert technical assistance if they need it, right? And then also, ultimately, participants completing the training should think about, they want to run their long-term profitable business. So making sure that they understand their cash flow management so that they can do that. Those are ultimately the learning objectives of the module. So like I said, this module features a theoretical case study about Bob and the wired cup. So the case begins on page 29 in your participant guide. And so I've also copied it up on the screen for you to read. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to give you a few minutes to just read through that, and then we will move forward. But you can, like I said, you can scroll to page 29 in your participant guide, or you can read it on the slide if you're able to read it. If the font's not too small. Okay, so hopefully you've had a minute or two to read through the case study there. So just to highlight a couple points. So we have Bob. He's the main subject of our case study, and he has started a business, a bakery cafe called the Wired Cup. So located in a college town, gives you some information about how he started his business with $30,000 of his own cash. He sought out a loan to help with some of the other startup costs from a bank, what he spent on initial startup costs, what that left him for money to run his business, right? So we got some information there, a little bit more information about the market that he's operating in, right? So he's on a college campus, it's popular with students. Of course, it's, he's running his business like a lot of small business owners. He has concerns. He hadn't yet paid himself anything, so he wonders when he might be able to pay himself from his business. The $5,000 he had left over after his startup cost is almost gone. His key customers are students. Obviously, a number of them would be going home over holiday break. So the question there being, what's the question Bob's asking now? Where is he out of his business? Started up, where's his business going with that sort of cash flow? So that's the question that he has, and that's the case study. So then through this module, we're going to look at this theoretical case study and his business. This realistic example is a good way to help participants in the training course review and analyze a new business owner's cash flow management decision. So we can look back to the scenario to understand some of the decisions that he's made, and then we will put ourselves into the shoes of an advisor to Bob and talk about, through discussion, maybe what are some of the options that he has. Ultimately, the goal is to help aspiring and existing entrepreneurs try to relate to Bob's scenario and kind of relate that to their own maybe cash flow situation or their own cash flow projections. And again, learn through advising somebody else tips and tricks or considerations that they might implement for themselves. So again, the question that Bob faces, or the problem that he faces, is some cash flow issues, right? He's got only $5,000 left to operate his business, and so he has to figure out how to juggle his priorities in operating this business. So this case itself kind of portrays that typical situation, the business owner not paying himself. He really needs to reduce his costs in order to be able to keep his business open. And then perhaps it needs to negotiate payment terms with suppliers just to free up more cash flow and make his business a little bit more viable. So again, through this module, we would be asking the participants to step into the shoes of an advisor to Bob. We will, in the next couple slides, talk about the cash flow statements that are provided for his business, analyze them, and allow participants, and in this case, allow you to be able to kind of spot errors or problems that could be fixed, right? Thinking about the cash flow decisions that Bob has to make. So then, acting as an advisor to Bob, we will review his full cash flow, or at least look at it. We'll touch on it, but in the actual module, you would look at it in more detail, find out some of the issues, and then make recommendations to Bob based on his cash flow statement. So ideally, the exercise will enlighten the entrepreneurs that are participating in the class or in your training to encourage them to apply what they have learned to their own cash flow statements and projections, as I had mentioned. Again, taking the learning and applying it to their own scenario. So if you go to page 30 of your participant guide, you will see the opening balance sheet for the business. We have copied it on the slide. I realize that it's a little bit hard to read, so wanted to give you that reference. But the purpose of this slide is to introduce the balance sheet to the entrepreneurs, demonstrate that the business tells a story, right? We talked about that earlier, that this is going to demonstrate, or the balance sheet demonstrates the story of the business in numbers. So this opening balance sheet tells a story that Bob started his business, how he financed it, what he did with his money, and how much he has left over to run it. Again, to summarize what we already know, we can see in the equity portion of the balance sheet that Bob invested $30,000 of his own money. It's considered his owner's equity. He borrowed $20,000. He borrowed this over 5 years at a 14.5% interest rate. So in year one, Bob has a liability of $3,371 of principal to pay. So he has that for the current liabilities for the bank note. And he will pay the remaining balance in years 2 through 5. So those are listed there as the long-term liabilities. You can see that on the balance sheet. In total, Bob had $50,000 to spend on opening his business. He spent $45,000 on equipment, materials, and other assets, as you can see on the left-hand side of the balance sheet. So you can see there we've got $29,500 in fixed assets, $15,500 in current assets, which equals the $45,000 that he spent, and that leaves him with the $5,000 cash remaining that you see at the top of the asset list. So that's the $5,000 he has left to run his business. Again, this balance sheet is telling the story of his business, how he opened his business in numbers. And this story of how the business was opened is very telling, not only to the business owner, but it's information for lenders, investors, or other financial experts to gain insight into how he's running his business. And it's the story of his business, as we've said. Okay, so as you know, it takes money to start a business. Bob has $20,000 in debt. So let's talk briefly about notes about debt. And again, you see that this is a slide directly from the module materials. So many entrepreneurs will need to get some sort of external financing, typically in the form of a loan, to help finance their business. After completing the balance sheet overview, we recommend to instructors to ask the entrepreneurs about how they're going to finance their own business. Again, helping them kind of internalize the material that you're talking about. So as I said, this slide is included in the Managing Cash Flow module, and it's an opportunity to kind of start that initial discussion about financing a business, and then a few notes about debt. So it's a great way to stimulate a group discussion. As the instructor, you should make it very clear that, as David said earlier, their personal credit score really can impact a business's ability to qualify for credit. So that it's really important for a small business owner to develop a positive relationship with local bankers really before they actually need a loan or before they're applying for that loan as well. Okay, so it's developing that relationship, involving them in the planning process from the get-go, because having that relationship established will make it easier down the road when you're, as a business owner, trying to get that loan or qualify for that credit. As a new business entrepreneur, as you know, if you have no business track record, institutions are going to look at the personal credit score to make that lending decision. And David touched on this briefly as well. So it's a good practice for entrepreneurs to be realistic and understand that managing their expectations about how their personal credit score impacts their business, and advise them that, you know, banks have different criteria for lending. So, you know, encouraging them to talk to their local bankers before they need the loan, again, involving them earlier in the process, strengthening that relationship with the bank. The more supportive they can be, or if the business owner is developing that relationship with the lender can be more supportive and help them in securing the loan when that time comes. And this is also a great place where the Money Smart for Small Business module on banking services can really help. Because as an entrepreneur, if you're curious about the banking services that are available to you, that can help provide you some information there and better prepare you as a business owner to discuss banking services with your lender. Also, just you know, when you're instructing this, it's important for instructors to communicate to participants about the importance of being prepared that the business owner might personally have to sign for the loan. And then also, if the business is unable to meet their financial obligations, that they're going to be held personally responsible. Also, just advising business owners that they should be prepared to pledge collateral, right? So the lender is going to want some sort of security for their loan. And then also advising the entrepreneurs to manage their credit cards by avoiding high fees and interest that you typically get with credit cards. And just also stressing the fact that business credit cards are one of the most expensive forms of business credit that are out there. So some just great tips and tricks and suggestions for business entrepreneurs as they think about debt and think about how they're going to use debt in financing their business. Okay. So let's jump into this concept of cash flow. This module highlights three different views or three important views of cash flow. They all interrelate, but they're kind of thought of in three different ways. So we've got the cash conversion cycle, the cash flow diagram, and the cash flow statement, which is what we talked a little bit about, or we will talk about related to the wired cup, and that's the method that they have adopted. So the first of these views on cash flow is the cash conversion cycle. And it consists of the three components that make up the triangle on the slide in front of you. So the first one at the top, the business pays for raw materials. This is money out for the business. Okay, so as we see the the business buying those materials that they need for their product, that's money out of the business. You get down to the lower right-hand corner of that triangle, and you see that the business is making a product or service using those materials. And you move over to the bottom left, and you see that the business then sells the product or service, and that results in money into the business. Okay, so that whole cycle there, circle, is the conversion cycle. The trick here is to know how long it will take to complete that cycle. So that's the rate of conversion, and that it impacts the cash flow in your business. So obviously, if you have a short cycle, if you're able to sell the inventory quickly and turn it back into cash, that's going to put money back into the cash flow system. Okay? A really good example of this type of cash flow would be a dry cleaning business or a restaurant. The consumers in these types of businesses typically pay immediately for the service or product, and that's going to very quickly then turn that product or service back into money that's cash flowing through the business. Conversely, if you have a long cash conversion cycle, you're not able to use that money while you might have inventory that's sitting on your shelves. Okay, it's much slower to turn that inventory back into cash. So an example here is anybody in manufacturing, right? That manufacturing process, there's several steps in creating the product. Maybe you have some inventory until you can get that inventory sold and convert it back to cash. So that longer process then makes the cash collection time longer, has a slower cash conversion cycle. So that's just kind of the first way that the module talks about this concept of cash flow. The second way is a cash flow diagram. Now, we have a diagram on the slide. I apologize because it's quite busy and probably pretty small on your screen. So I would encourage you to flip to page 32 of your participant guide. And it is here where you can see this diagram a little bit bigger. And then I would also just point you to page 33, the next page, where it does provide some descriptions of the elements that make up that diagram. We are going to talk about it here and talk about some of those elements, but if you want to read about every specific one, you can get that information on page 33. As it notes on the slide, the diagram was adapted by George M. Dawson, illustrated by Buck Dawson, so it's it's been adapted there. But it's really a visual representation of how cash flows in and out of a system or a business. So the water is going to represent the cash flowing in the system. So when you start your business, your money is flowing into the business via either debt or equity. So in the case of Bob and the wired cup, he had $30,000 of his own money that he invested in the business. So that is going to be in the equity bucket on this diagram in the upper right-hand side. In addition to that, we know that Bob borrowed $20,000, okay, so that came from a loan, and that's in the debt bucket on the top of the diagram as well. So the combined $50,000 then is the available cash or the working capital that is represented in the central water tank in the diagram. Okay, that's the available cash he had for starting his business. From there, we had $50,000, like we said, flow into the system. Bob has to make decisions now on how he's going to spend that money. And so the valves are controlled by Bob. The valves represent the decisions and the decision points that Bob has in starting his business and running his business. So he has to decide how much money he's going to spend, when he's going to spend it, and where he's going to spend it. So this module then kind of illustrates, or this diagram, you can think about the diagram and the theoretical case study that we've been talking about in this module. We can see where Bob's making these decisions. In this case, some of the valves are open all the time. So if you look to the bottom of the available cash tank, right, the central tank in the business, there are certain valves that are open all the time. These are the sales tax, debts. These are things the business owner has to pay no matter what. So they're a constant drain on the cash in the business, which is why they're at the bottom. There's really not actually any valve there to shut it off. because those are constantly dripping out of that available cash bucket. But out the side, you see there are some other valves that are partially open. Those are things like sales, general administration, okay? So Bob has some ability to control those, and those have valves, how quickly he wants to let the cash out for those particular purposes. So he spends his available cash, his working capital, and then the available cash balance in his center cash tank starts to drop. So if all's working well, in this case with the wired cut, Bob's able to, Bob's cash conversion cycle is pretty short. He's able to take, a quick trip through inventory into sales, and then that's out the left side and back up to the sales pump, and that pumps back into the sales bucket on the top, which is ultimately feeding back into the available cash. So ideally, if he's got a short cash cycle, he can get cash back into the available cash to continue to operate his business. Okay, so that short cycle is going to help him. And ideally, with any business, you would want to see more money coming into the system in the sales bucket on the top than what's going out through the valves or through the drains and into the inventory on the left-hand side. So this diagram represents, for the visual learner, the cash flow system and the decision points that are faced by an entrepreneur. So then as that entrepreneur, you have to control and understand how to use those valves and how to get that cash flow to run through your business model. And of course, in business, while it's nice to have that visual, we wouldn't actually use such a diagram to represent the cash flow. It would just be kind of messy and cumbersome. So instead, entrepreneurs and business owners use what's called a cash flow statement that tells them that same story and shows that same cycle, cash flow diagram, but with numbers typically in a spreadsheet. So on this next slide here, we are going to take a quick look at the cash flow statement for the wired cut. Now, I realize this cash flow statement is almost impossible to read, so I will refer you to page 35 of the participant guide to follow along and take a look at the cash flow statement there. So as we said, the cash flow statement is a valuable decision-making tool for any business owner, but not only the business owner, it could be for the investors or creditors, right? It's going to allow anybody that's looking at that business to be able to make smart and informed decisions about the business. Again, focusing on the cash flow, right? When and where is the money coming in? When and where is the money going out? Okay? So the cash flow statement tells us things like how much money does Bob have to run his business? How much money is Bob moving in and out of his business? And where is the money coming from? Right? So what are sales looking like, or is there more equity coming in? And where is the money going? What is he spending the money on? And then when is that money moving in and out? And the when money is moving out is a really important piece as well. If you can look in your participant guide to the lower right-hand corner, you will see that his cash flow statement that was created shows a projected loss of $4,316. And we all know you can't operate a business with negative cash flow. Okay? You just can't have negative cash flow. The businesses will have run out of money. Okay? So Bob put together his cash flow, and he's looking forward, and he sees that he's got this projected negative cash flow. He's got to make some decisions about his business now so that he can get that cash flow to be positive. So what can Bob do? Okay, this is a specific question that you will be asking participants that are attending your Managing Cash Flow class. And that's kind of the piece of this module that asks the entrepreneurs in your class to step in as an advisor to Bob and say, what are the things that he can do to help improve the cash flow situation for his business? All right, so we're looking forward. So that's kind of setting up the basis of it. What can Bob do? So then you see on this next slide here, and you can turn to page 36 in your participant guide. You will find this group discussion listed there as well. I did copy it onto the slide for you to read as well. Just gives you kind of some additional information about our case study here. We will not be doing a specific breakout for this discussion. We'll just kind of briefly cover it here in our training. But do know that if you are providing this training, and especially in a virtual format, some webinar platforms do allow you the capability of hosting breakouts. And so if you get to this point in the module where we're asking the entrepreneurs to be the advisor to Bob, you might be able to break them into smaller groups where they can do some smaller group discussions and then come back together as a larger group to debrief. Of course, if you're doing this in person, that's a process that's a little bit easier to happen. But ultimately, as the instructor, you would want to ask the class participants to read through this text, okay, and then ask them to be an advisor to Bob. And that leads us to the question on the bottom. So if you were advising Bob, what would you suggest? So I'll give you just a quick minute here to scan through the additional text that's provided about our case. Okay, so as we can see, obviously to stay in business, Bob has to increase his sales revenue, needs to negotiate agreements to decrease his costs, help control his cash flow. We know that. His cash flow is projected to be negative. He's juggling some competing demands, right? Every small business owner knows how that goes. He's trying to hold on to his cash as long as possible. He's got landlords and vendors that want some of his money. He's got to balance these expectations and really wants to negotiate win-win situations to continue to operate his business, right? So what would you suggest? So through this module then, as you can see on this next slide here, this is a guided discussion. And so you can see this is an actual slide from the module itself. And you would be able to lead the group discussion about what Bob should do. And you can write ideas from your participants either on paper, if you're in person, on chart paper, if you've got a marker board or something like that. But ultimately, as the instructor, you want to guide the discussion. Get the participants to think about ways that they can impact the cash flow by making suggestions to Bob, the business owner. So what are some, to get the participants thinking, the instructor guide has some guides for the discussion. Have them think about ways to increase revenue. Okay, what can he do to increase revenue? Might be some different options. What can he do to negotiate more favorable terms with his vendors and suppliers? Okay, so you can kind of guide the discussion and lead maybe with some more areas in which you can provide suggestions. Of course, the third one there would be reducing costs during slow months, right? Try to focus on ways to reduce those costs during those summer months when the students return home. That's going to help them focus the discussion. So possible ideas then. And these are the possible ideas that are provided in the module itself. These may or may not align with exactly with what the participants in the class have come up with, but you can certainly show the slide right from the module material and compare those to the answers that the participants gave. So again, ideas for increasing revenue. Maybe it's providing incentives, start catering or offering that ancillary service, selling gift cards. Opportunities for negotiating with vendors and suppliers, asking for better terms or payment plans. Again, for the landlord, maybe you offer to pay the entire year rent in 10 months and not 12. So looking at ways to do that. Reducing the cost, obviously, in those slow months when the students return home. Reducing staff, adjusting store hours, reducing menu options. So again, this slide is just provided in the materials just to help kind of trigger some discussions. Maybe these are ideas that weren't brought up or discussed by your group, but these are possible solutions that you can talk about. Again, the goal of this exercise is to get the entrepreneurs to be thinking ahead and make smart cash flow decisions. And so hopefully by incorporating this line of thinking or advising to Bob, it might give them some ideas or things to think about for their own business ventures as they move forward kind of after this training. Okay, so the other thing that the module will talk about next is what not to do. So we know that Bob is strapped for cash, and so we went through a discussion process with our participants to talk about some suggestions for Bob. But it's also important for entrepreneurs to think about things that they should really avoid doing to help them, or things that they should avoid doing when they're in a cash flow crunch, because they're going to be things that are not really actually going to help their situation. So again, these are decisions that would put them in maybe a worse situation. So again, not postponing the payment of estimated taxes, hiding from their loan officers. Instead, you would want to emphasize the fact that this would be an opportunity for them to actually seek out their lender and work with their lender, work collaboratively with them to solve that problem. Make sure that they understand that they should never pay their vendors late. And ultimately, emphasizing the fact that you, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to overestimate future revenues and underestimate their costs. You don't want to pad your cash flow just to make it look better, okay? Those are things that are not really, while you think they might help, they're actually not going to help the success of the business. Again, by talking about what not to do, the goal is to get the entrepreneurs to think about, maybe what they can do from a positive perspective, but also think about things that they really need to avoid or shouldn't do in running a profitable business. Again, here an important point is that before entrepreneurs consider using personal credit cards or leveraging personal assets, encourage them to reach out to other organizations that provide assistance to small businesses, whether that's financial advisors. Talk to Money Smart for Small Business instructors. Maybe they have networks that they can leverage to provide local resources where small business owners can get assistance. Again, those are much better options oftentimes than using personal credit cards or personal assets. So just emphasizing that in the training as well. So key points to remember real quickly here. Again, for the entrepreneurs that are attending this class, things that they want to remember are the fact that managing the cash flow is a core competency. You have to be able to do that to run a successful business. The opening balance sheet itself tells a compelling story about the business. And then the cash flow statement tells the ongoing story of the business. And it's used to kind of project where you'll have money flowing in and out of the business. Again, it's important for the entrepreneurs to think about seasonal fluctuations. Think about their cash flow conversion cycle. How can they speed that up? Obviously, the faster that conversion cycle, the better their cash flow situation will be. Managing paperwork. There's always paperwork to deal with when it comes to small businesses. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it's important to stress to entrepreneurs that they should ask, an accountant or their lender to seek out advice and seek out guidance from those that might have resources and be assistance to them in being successful with their business. The other thing I want to point out, this is in your participant guide, but this is also resources that are available to the participants in your training or the entrepreneurs that are participating. Again, you see this is a slide that comes directly from the module materials, but there's a glossary of cash flow terms so that entrepreneurs can be familiar with that terminology. There is a template cash flow statement if they want to look at that. There are a lot of great tips on negotiating better terms with their suppliers and vendors that's available to them as a resource. And there's also a list of free technical assistance providers that's available to them. Again, a lot of free resources for small business owners. And so just kind of emphasizing that they look to those resources as they're starting their business. All right, so this ends our deep dive into Module 13, the Managing Cash Flow Module. I just want to circle back real quickly. If you remember, we started our deep dive by talking about the pre-test. So similar to that, if we were at the end of our module, we would refer back to our participant guide where there would be a post-test, okay, where the participants can reflect back on the learning that they just had. You also can turn back to page 44 in your participant guide where we started and would be able to see what the post-test is for the session. Again, it's there and designed to assess what participants have learned. And I apologize, I have not advanced the slides. So as far as evaluating them, in addition to the post-test, there is an evaluation that is provided to you on page 45 of your participant guide. Each module comes with an evaluation. It's a best practice to evaluate your audience for the quality and impact of the module and to identify what's next. So let's talk about those. In evaluating the training, it's an easy-to-complete form, and that form is going to be an effective tool for you as an instructor to gauge their immediate reaction to the class. But another great way to evaluate the impact of the training is to, after the fact, conduct maybe a follow-up. There's a lot of great free online survey tools that are out there, and you could potentially set up a follow-up survey. Maybe it's just a couple quick questions. Ask them if they've had time to reflect on what they learned and what they feel, maybe a week after the training, what was the most compelling learning points from the training. Ask them maybe if they've had time to take steps or apply anything that they learned, and what were the most important key principles that they took away from the training. Or you could ask them if they have not had an opportunity to apply any of those principles, what has prevented them from doing so. Okay, so that's a great way to evaluate that quality and impact of the training. The other piece of it is asking them what's next. At the end of the training, it's a really great idea to solicit that. What's next? Where are you going next with this material? Are there topics that you want to talk about in more detail? Again, if thinking about this cash flow module, if you taught just this one module, maybe you ask them if there's other topics that they're interested in managing their business. And so then maybe there's other modules you can pull in. Again, you can scan the parking lot. David discussed the parking lot a little earlier. If you've got questions that you need to address at a later date, that's a great place to look for ideas and inspiration on other topics and training ideas for that particular group of participants. And the last suggestion there is if you happen to bring in a guest expert, let's say you're putting on this training for small business owners, you've pulled together a few of the modules, maybe you've brought in a guest expert, a lender, or somebody else from the community to talk about small business resources in the community. They might have great suggestions on what are questions that they frequently get from other small business owners in the community, and that can be a great resource for identifying where to go next with your training program. So always a good idea to kind of solicit for that what's next topic. With that is going to wrap up our deep dive on Module 13. We talked about the pre-test and the post-test and evaluation a little bit. And so with that, I am going to pass it back over to David to wrap us up.
All righty. Well, thank you, Jen. I know it's always an interesting class, especially one that talks about cash flow and financial statements. I know it could be a tough one to follow and also teach, but great job. I'm going to turn our attention really quickly. I know we have a few minutes and we do want to get to the questions. I think that's the most important part. But just talk a little bit about getting started with MSSB. The next slides that I'm going to share with you are hopefully actionable steps that you can put into practice so they can help you launch your own MSSB program. So we think it's a value to share because these are questions that have come up in the past, so that's why we've included them in here. So the slide you're looking at, it looks a little different than all the other ones that we've shown, but it was by design. So as you know, as you can think about the 13 modules that we want you to know, you realize that they all talk about small business or some aspect of small business, but they speak to it from a different perspective, hence the different shades of that mustard brownish color. These modules, we want you to remember that they can be taught as a standalone and be presented topic by topic. They can be mixed and matched to meet the needs of your entrepreneurs, so they don't have to be taught in the order that Jen and I presented it or the order that they're listed on our website. I think that Jen made a point, let the audience dictate where you go with these. So you know the folks that you work with, let that be your guide as to where you want to start. We gave you a template of what many organizations use, and a good launching point is always that, those two modules that Jen mentioned. Remember that they can be integrated into your existing training programs. We want this to be complementary to what you're doing, not to be in competition whatsoever. You can, pick and choose the module that maybe complements a topic that you already discussed in your existing programs. Remember, this is all free of copyright, so feel free to add your logo. Feel free to delete the material if you think it's it's a lengthy material for your audience. You know them better than we do. These are available in Word and PDF formats, and we do have customizable files that you can adjust to fit your needs. Okay, so I'm going to share this. I think this is important. Ideally, any program will start, like I mentioned, with the two fundamental modules. Either is small business ownership a good fit for you, or the second one, planning for a healthy business. Both Jen spoke about both of them earlier in the first half of our training. These modules cover fundamental principles of a small business ownership. They are very interactive, which helps you learn more about the entrepreneur's business and concerns. So some of our financial institutions and organizations that participate with us offer individual classes once or twice a week for a number of weeks, as you see in sample 1. So in this approach, the benefit of really adopting this approach is that you can plan and advertise an entire program ahead of time. It's easy to recruit and orient experts if you're going to be needing them. The downside, however, to this approach is that you're locked into a plan when class participants may want you to be more flexible. So again, you're locked into this plan because you've now advertised it, but in class number 3, you realize that it's more important to talk about organizational types with this particular group instead of moving into managing cash flow. So that's kind of the drawback of that. Other financial institutions and organizations may prefer to offer combinations of this, such as a full-day program or Saturdays once or twice per month, allowing them to combine 2 or more modules. So again, some flexibility there. The sample number 2 that we have on your screen, this one in particular, note that the topics for day 2, 3, and 4 are not set. This allows you to custom design a program based on focus group feedback and from questions that the small business owners ask. So again, I think what you're doing is letting the audience dictate kind of the path you want to take, which again, it could be also a good approach for you, okay? The option may be challenging to manage in terms of advertising and for recruiting any experts you may need. So again, it does come with a downfall. Obviously, because you do not have a prescribed path that you'll be following, it's going to be hard if you want to include some of those partners that we think are so valuable to delivering this program. But again, it's manageable. The class participants will be invaluable advisors on the selection and the sequencing of the modules. Ask them what they want to know and ideal times to offer classes. So again, you can find a way to work around this. Working with experts, we highly encourage it. You don't have to do this alone, is what we're trying to say. You can get these guest experts to help you, especially on those difficult topics or ones that are unfamiliar. Guest experts bring a wealth of experience and expertise to our Money Smart classes. There are 3 main categories of experts that you may want to start thinking if you do not have someone in this group. But small business owners, these folks are great, especially if they've been through your program successfully, or we even have sometimes folks that we highlight on our Alliance membership monthly newsletter, of successful businesses that have gone through these programs. Again, in this environment of virtual training, it doesn't matter if they're not, in your state. We're sitting here on the East Coast. I think Jen is in the Midwest, and you guys are in Hawaii. So again, this facilitates bringing those experts. Representatives from such fields as banking, credit reporting, and taxation strongly advise you to have these folks and any professionals who advise clients on a regular basis. And I hear we heard accountants, insurance brokers, those are very common. So experts, like we said, contribute a great deal, especially when they're telling or sharing their real-life experiences about clients they've helped. There are some risks, though, that we want you to kind of consider when you bring these folks on board. If they're unprepared, they can be ineffective. So we've heard that before. They can lose track of time or provide examples that are not relevant to the questions that the learners ask. Some experts tend to use jargon or technical language, which might confuse participants more than they can help. And again, I've sat through classes, where the instructor thinks that I'm already up to speed as to what the terminology is, and it's really hard to follow. So again, just keep that in mind, that experts, they do bring a great value, but I think just having that upfront conversation in the front end of telling them, listen, this is what I expect, this is what who our audience is, explain who you're speaking to, and kind of describe some of the pitfalls that we just shared with you to avoid. Okay, so this is another important slide that we want you to know. Anyone can download the Money Smart for Small Business curriculum, which is available on the FDIC catalog. I have the email in front of you. However, we encourage organizations to join the Money Smart Alliance to benefit from meeting other MSSB users. This is a short form to fill out, and the most updated link will always be available on the Money Smart webpage. Both joining the Alliance and downloading the trainings are very easy. The materials are available for download. With it, you'll have what we already mentioned, the instructor guide, participant guide, and PowerPoint presentations for each module, as well as you can get a CD-ROM, including all modules, can be ordered by using the catalog that I mentioned earlier there on your screen. There is no certification required to use our curriculum. However, it's ideal that MSSB instructors have experience in delivering training, technical assistance, or coaching to small businesses. I think that obviously is a prerequisite when delivering these. There's also a self-assessment that we guide a lot of the organizations to. It's called, Is Your Organization Ready to Offer Training? That's on page 15 of your guide that we shared with you, and this can help determine your readiness to host an MSSB program. And if after taking the short questionnaire, you say, you know what, I'm not ready, well, that's the value that we offer. I saw her on the line, Kathy. She works directly with Joe. She covers our West Coast region. There's many of her in that market, but I think she would be your primary contact. If your organization is looking to adopt and you don't know where to start, you don't know if you're ready, work with Kathy and she can get you guys up and going, or connect you guys to us. Here you'll have a partial screenshot of the most current MSSB webpage. I know it's very hard to read, but we wanted you to at least have an idea of what you're looking for if you're hunting for the page. There is information about how to join the Alliance, like I mentioned, the Money Smart Alliance, how to download the Money Smart trainings and other resources that we have available. Yeah, easily done. You simply go to fdic.gov/MoneySmart. That will bring you to our landing page that asks if you want to learn about it or teach it, and that's where we guide everyone. You want to hit the teach option, which will get you kind of to the instructor mode, if you will, portion of the site. And that will bring you directly to the Money Smart for Small Business Learn More option. You click on that, and you'll get exactly what you see in front of you. Again, you don't have to remember these steps. We will be sharing them with you. But we just wanted you to have a visual. I know sometimes people jump ahead and start looking for the site, but this is where you want to go. There on the listed up right below training modules, you have all 13 modules. There are drop-down menus that will give you all three of the components that we talked about, both the instructor and participant guide and PowerPoint slides. Again, here's a snapshot just of the current version of the FDIC catalog. This is where you'll be ordering things. If you want the MP3 files, the CD-ROM files that I mentioned, if you need any collateral to help promote the event, bilingual flyers in English and Spanish, I know that they're available there. So they're there for your use. Okay, and then this is important. The appendix section of your participant guide is where you'll find marketing and plan of action templates to organize and promote your training program, as well as checklists and tips on how to host a successful MSSB training program. I can't stress this enough. I know that when I was out in the market training, I know that we had one or two occasions where we did not use the checklist and we forgot to make sure that the facility that we were using had a projector. So again, these checklists are very, very important, even though sometimes they may seem very elementary. They do help you stay on top of things. They help you, get organized. You will also receive support from, like I mentioned, the FDIC Community Affairs staff to help you plan and design the MSSB Train the Trainer sessions. If you have any questions, I think Kathy on our chat just shared her email. So again, she's a great point of contact. Maybe if you want to, kind of walk her through some of your clients, who your clients are, what you think they'll be interested in, she can help design a coursework for you. Maybe they don't need 13 modules. Maybe they need the 3 most popular modules that we have. Again, we use her as a resource. On that same guide, I'm going to just walk you through, you'll find on page 17 the glossary of terms. I think Jen mentioned that. On page 21, you have the MSSB modules matrix. Really, it's a snapshot of all the modules that we have in one place. On page 26, you'll have the Managing Cash Flow Participant Guide, and the accompanying instructor guide for that module is on page 47. If you look at page 73, you'll find the plan of action worksheet that can be used at the end of the MSSB training workshop to assist you on how you will utilize our products and our curriculum. And on page 75, you'll find the MSSB invitation and agenda template. And I've copied one of those on the slide. I think that's the first one on the back side that you see there. It reads, Organization A and B invite you to our Money Smart Small Business Trainer session. Again, it is a template. This could be an invitation and has an agenda already. And the other one is the preparation checklist that I gave you an example of. So moving on, we hopefully you took a lot, just, kind of what this program is, who it was created for, who can benefit from it. Obviously, there's different people that we had, or different groups that we had in mind as far as targets and how they benefit. But really, it's something that to keep in the back of your mind is that we really want, for engagement between financial institutions and and community organizations to engage with small business owners. We feel that engagement, that impactful, that purposeful engagement will create or spur economic activity regardless of what community we're in or we're dealing with. And I think that's the ultimate goal if you want to take anything away from what we talked earlier on. And I know we're coming close to our cutoff time, so I do want to get to our questions. I know that we're a few here on the chat function, but if you can stick around for a few more minutes, I'm going to invite Jen to come back online, and we are happy to take any questions either over the phone if our operator can open up the lines, or to the chat function. Feel free to share your thoughts or your questions as well. Operator?
And again,
David, maybe while we
question over the phone line, please press *1. Apologies.
So *1 if you have any questions for us, and then I'll turn it over to you. I know you had a comment.
Yep. David, I was going to say if we wait for questions to come in, we did get one on the chat that said, what e-learning support is there for students to do self-study, if any?
Yes.
You want to comment on
that? You want to comment on it? I'm happy to also share my thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the nothing specifically for self-study, but the modules themselves with the instructor guide and the participant guide, those materials are certainly accessible to anyone. And so if somebody is interested in kind of doing some self-study, they can, through those materials, engage in self-study.
Yeah, good point. The instructor guide is kind of your answer key to the participant guide, and again, it's available for anyone that really just visits our site. But another approach that I think we were having a discussion was that we were looking to maybe record some of these live trainings, and maybe even some of our alliance members who are delivering these specific trainings to entrepreneurs, recording them and then making them available online. Where if you do have a client that wants to do the self-study, that if it's easier for them to just watch the training at their own time and leisure, at home, that they'll have those recordings of a live training and they can follow along with the participant and instructor guide as a possible solution. So that's another thought that we've given this.
Yeah, very
Operator,
good.
Any questions over the line, operator?
And at this time, I'm currently showing no questions online. But again, that's *1 if you'd like to ask questions online.
Yes, so thank you. Through the chat, I also see that Lori, and I'll read your question, Lori. Are there sessions we can join to observe sessions that are being conducted as a way for us to learn from experienced presenters? So if I'm understanding your question correctly, that you want to have an opportunity to just sit in listen-only mode to learn from people who are already delivering our curriculum, and the answer is yes. We actually have a network of alliance members throughout the country that are delivering these modules, throughout the year. And if you do have one, again, because of, most of these trainings are now happening online through a virtual format, it could be an ease for you to join. And please reach out to us, either Kathy, that she shared her email, or myself or Jennifer. We can connect you. We can, reach out to a handful of our active members to see what their calendar looks like for any trainings, and if they can make the link available for you to join, or not just Lori, for anyone on the call if you want to see the end product. Because again, the FDIC, we train the instructors. We're not delivering these courses directly to the public. So again, that would be a solution for that. So Lori, it sounds like we got it. Alrighty, Joe, I thought I saw a question from you. Joe, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, but I think
right.
we're running a little bit late right now, so I think I'm going to defer for now, if that's okay.
No worries, no worries. Well then, with that, I know we ran a few minutes late, so I'll turn it over to you, Joe, to just close us out and end the webinar for today.
Great. Thank you, David. So just two things very, very quickly. One is some of us have already been talking about joining together, putting on this curriculum, all 13 modules at some point in the near future. So if anyone on the line is interested, please let me know, and we'll get with FDIC and put something together. And then secondly, I would really like to thank David, Jen, Bobby, Kathy, everyone for this presentation. It's been really great. Hard to believe that such great content is free and available, as well as the support. So I know everyone here joins me in thanking you, and we will certainly be in touch. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining. Appreciate your time, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.